X-Men 97 had a video game episode complete with pixel art. First, I'm going to analyze the pixel art that was in the episode. Second, I'm going to recreate one of the sprites that was in the episode to kind of learn the style. And then I'm going to create a new character in that same style. Let's get to it. Hey, I'm Andrew, and I have not been watching X-Men 97. But when I found out they had a video game episode with pixel art, I knew I had to watch it. So I did, and now that I've seen it, I gotta say, that was pretty neat. My first question was, did Disney manage to learn how to make pixel art just for this episode? No. I found the original artist on Instagram. His name is John Davies. He has worked on Cave Story Plus, The Binding of Isaac, a bunch of other stuff, so that's pretty cool. Go check him out. In the show, Jubilee and this guy get trapped in a video game universe. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up game, which X-Men has had a few of those over the years. The 1992 arcade game was the big one for them. You can see a lot of similarities between that one and the fictional game that is presented here. It's got a character select screen, health bars along the top, shadows underneath the character feet for clarity. Pretty standard stuff for a beat 'em up. One adorable little detail they have is that during some of the gameplay segments, the screen is still 4:3 like it would have been back in the 90s, but because we're on widescreen TVs, they added in little banners along the side with the characters on them. I think that's a cute little thing. Sometimes game companies do that in re-releases of old games. Like the arcade game, the intro scene in the show features attacking sentinels. These ones have bigger heads and are a little more cartoony. That's a running theme, especially with the in-game graphics. I'll show you what I mean. Jubilee wasn't playable in the arcade game, so here is a sprite of Storm for comparison. She has pretty standard comic book proportions, including a realistically sized head. The most comparable sprite of Jubilee that I could find is this one from Marvel vs. Capcom. Same deal, fairly realistic. The Jubilee in the show, however, is a bit more cartoony. My guess as to why they used these more exaggerated proportions is that it's easier to get more detail in the character's face when that face is larger. Even aside from the proportions, I could tell that this was a pretty big sprite. But how big? Let's rebuild Jubilee and find out. The first step was getting a good screenshot of Jubilee. The first thing I tried was taking a screenshot from Disney Plus. Turns out you get just a solid black screen when you do that, and that doesn't work. My second step should have been just taking a screenshot from YouTube, because you can do that, but I didn't know that back then, so instead I took a picture with my camera. Not my best plan. The image ends up with a lot of extra blurry effects on it, almost like you're looking at it through a CRT filter. I imported my photo into Pixaki as a reference, and the actual first step was figuring out exactly how large 1 pixel is. I resized the reference photo 1,000 times while making these little green dots, until I figured the green dot and the pixels in the reference were the exact same size. After that, I ditched the green and started tracing. The colors I used came mostly from the Marvel vs. Capcom sprite and this Instagram Jubilee dinosaur animation. Both were pretty blurry, so I had to wing it, especially for the midtones. I'll mention that my approach for shading this sprite was different from how I'll normally do it, which you'll see in the next character. But because I was aiming for a pixel-perfect recreation of an existing sprite, I tried to trace it literally 1 dot at a time. The reference photo has a few effects blocking the character. With that smoke over her chest and one of her boots, there is a shot of her without the effects later in the episode, but that shot is even more blurry. Still, worked good enough as a reference to guess at the missing areas. Here is the finished version. I'm sure there are a few pixels misplaced, but I think it turned out pretty good. Let's break it down. Storm in the 92 arcade game was 91 pixels tall. Jubilee in Marvel vs. Capcom was 98 pixels tall. This Jubilee? A whopping 108. She is huge. Again, I'm sure they did that for clarity on screen for a television show. It's not a style I would actually want to make a game in, but it is a style that I would want to use for a different character. The day that I started this animation was the same day that the Deadpool and Wolverine trailer came out. So first I grabbed a bunch of reference photos. I mostly focused on this one since it gives the clearest look at the actual detailing on Wolverine's costume. As for the pose, I went straight for this poster of Logan because it's badass. I made a rough sketch in Procreate as a guide with a sized up Jubilee to make sure I gave him similar cartoony proportions. I don't like to spend too much time on the sketch because I'm not sure how much detail will actually translate into pixels. I took that image and threw it into Pixaki. First up was just tracing the outline, and then I started filling in the colors one blob at a time. At this stage, I'm not usually too worried about accuracy. I just want something on the screen to work with. I had two major problems when I was making this sprite. The first was his arms. If you want to make big, detailed sprites of human beings who are not wearing baggy clothes, you've got to have a solid understanding of anatomy. I still very much struggle in that department, especially with muscles. I tend to draw muscular arms as beef slabs. Dude's got deltoids, biceps, which are not flexing, triceps, big old forearms, and they should taper down at the wrist. By the end, I got there, but it really was a matter of beating my head against it, going to do other fun stuff like color, going back to the arms, back to the fun stuff, and round until it was finished and it looked like a real person's arms. For his colors, I took some from Jubilee, and I got most of them from a Game Boy Advance game called X-Men Reign of Apocalypse. They're super saturated and bright, and I love them. And I almost used them the entire time, but they really don't match the Jubilee style. They're too saturated, so I do end up fixing it at the very end. When you're coloring, one thing you should also pay attention to is whether or not the character has an outline, and if they do, how's that outline set up? In this game, it's not a solid color all the way around, they base it on the light source. So there is a light coming from above and to the right of the character. What they do is they make the outline a little bit brighter towards the light source, and they make it a little bit darker away from the light source. That's not required for every sprite, of course. You just need to stay consistent with whatever style you're working in. My other real struggle with this sprite was with Wolverine's head. I mentioned before that these are more cartoony proportions, right? So his head needed to be a little bit bigger, and I really struggled with making it not look like a bobblehead. And then every time I adjusted the size of his skull, I felt like his mouth wasn't quite right. When you're frustrated because you can't get something to work right, do what I do. Draw a burger. Look, it's all yummy and stuff. You could probably just go for a walk or take a break, you know, something like that, or just draw a burger and keep on going. After I finally settled on his head, made some color adjustments, fiddled around with the shapes a little bit more, and pablow! He's done, bub. Do I sound like him? Here is a final look at Jubilee and Wolverine, the infamous crime-fighting duo. I guess, maybe, I don't know, I didn't watch the show. Should I? Should I watch? Is it good? Can y'all let me know in the comments if this show is any good? If this was helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe and bell and all that kind of stuff, and draw a burger. And follow along for more pixel practice. So there is a light coming from above and to the right of the character, and so the camera's backwards, so